Beep beep boop beep boop beep 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 boop 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 beep 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 beep. Hello everyone, this is CM Kozaman. We are back with another extremely long, image-rich presentation podcast. This is actually the podcast form, the video form of a talk I had given 3 years ago. We are presenting in July 2020. It's a beautiful summer night, and we're gonna be talking about the latest news from the dinosaurs, even though the video is titled A Newbie's Guide to Dinosaurs. Because this video is intended to introduce the state of the art in dinosaur science and dinosaur art and our current knowledge of dinosaurs and other prehistoric animals and the art thereof to people who only have a surface level understanding of these creatures. I mean, somebody who's just maybe watched Jurassic Park and he thinks it's awesome, or probably even someone who doesn't even know or care to know about them. This is why, if you're one of the extremely involved dinosaur enthusiasts that make up the majority of my audience on YouTube, you might find it a bit repetitive, but I'm sure your friends will really enjoy it, and perhaps you will even use this video to convert them to the wonders of dinosaur wisdom, dinosaur art, and associated strange pursuits. Alright everyone, let's go. Now, please keep in mind once more that this is for the beginners or newbies who are not very well knowledgeable about dinosaurs, so apologies in advance if you find it too simplistic. I am CM Kozaman. If you're watching this video for the first time, and if you don't know anything about me, I'm an artist and researcher, and part of my artwork is also about dinosaurs and other prehistoric creatures. I even co-authored a book with my good friends John Conway and Darren Naish called All Yesterdays, and this book is all about a new look at dinosaurs and their world and how we see them, and I'm proud to say, it left quite a mark in the world of dinosaur books, and this is one of my artworks from this book. Our idea was to present dinosaurs in a new light, to show them as bird-like, naturalistic creatures and not like monsters from some sort of movie. And All Yesterdays was so well received that we even had a sequel book called All Your Yesterdays, and it was made up of submissions by fans and friends who participated in a contest associated with the book, and it's a much better book than the original All Yesterdays, and you can find its free download link in the video description below. So, newbies and normies, what do you think when you think dinosaurs? Do you think about screaming monsters whose only business was roaring and ripping each other up, screaming bulky monsters who disappeared only to set an example for the rest of evolutionary history, monsters you see in films racing on motorbikes with Chris Pratt, big lizards running about with teeth and scales coming out of every corner, or just dead things that just show us the consequence of being too bulky, too stupid, and too obsolete. Heck, the word dinosaur is even like a co-word for obsolete and people and things whose time has passed. A lot of old dinosaur art relied on this trope actually. This is the famous Zellinger mural showing plodding reptilian dinosaurs, amazingly well rendered, but they're still seen as sluggish reptiles who almost inherited the world by chance and grew too bulky and stupid in it, and as a result perished. Is this dear viewer, your view of dinosaurs? Or is it a more clear and thought-provoking and insightful view? Do you, like the minority of people interested in these animals, view them as unique, beautifully adapted creatures at home at their own long-gone, lost planet? They might be strange from our day's perspective, but this doesn't make them ugly, this doesn't make them monstrous, this just makes them inhabitants of another world, a world that was as deep, rich, and complex as our own. This artwork is by John Conway, by the way. Throughout this talk, there will be lots of images, and the artists will always be credited. If you're one of these artists and you're not happy about the portrayal of your works in this video, just let me know. Here is another artwork by John Conway, arguably the most important dinosaur artist alive in the 21st century. This is his view of Deinonychus, the famous raptor dinosaur. If we go back, movies portray this dinosaur as this, a big lizard that's all about killing and really fast. But John Conway's interpretation, based on solid science, portrays it as a bird-like, graceful animal at home at its environment, and not necessarily about killing all the time. It has this kind of serene, reposeful, the sense of strength and savagery is implied and not displayed pornographically. So, as you probably understand, the surface level of dinosaurs is all about stereotypes. Dinosaur stereotypes show them as movie monsters that are always screaming and killing each other. They're giants, they're reptilian, misadapted miscreants, and today's world, they are inconsequential because, hey, they're all dead. All their good, apparently, is for a parable or for a figure of speech. Are you a dinosaur? But in reality, dinosaurs were many of the real animals that lived in the past of our planet. And like many real animals, they had complex behaviors, complex sizes, forms, shapes, colors, many of which we don't know and cannot ever get to know. And that's part of the mystery that's got to do with this whole thing. But bear with us. In reality, we also know that most dinosaurs were active, bird-like animals, warm-blooded, and they were certainly not the sluggish reptiles we made them out to be. And in a way, as birds, they are still with us. They're just fluffier, smaller, and cuddlier. But before we get to understand the truth about dinosaurs, we have to school you newbies about what time means, what fossils mean, and what clades mean. Because when I was talking to my family relatives or normal friends about dinosaurs, usually telling about dinosaurs themselves was quite easy. The real difficulty was telling them about the depths of time, what a million years meant, what 65 million years mean, how evolution works, things like that. It's really surprising, but many people do not ever know about how time works, how evolution works, and how cladistics work. And without a basic understanding of these concepts, you can't really hope to understand dinosaurs or any other prehistoric animal for that matter. Time, for example, is a really deep and barely comprehensible concept. Most people think dinosaurs lived a million years ago or something, just before Caesar or monkeys, with all the mammoths and all those, and they believe all dinosaurs lived all together with all of the other prehistoric animals. But that's just wrong, man, wrong. For example, let's look at this image. To use a common metaphor, if the entire lifespan of our planet was compressed into one day, you would have complicated animals starting to appear maybe towards 9 p.m. And dinosaurs reign from like quarter to 11 until 11:40, and then only in the last minute before midnight humanity appears. Time is an enormously deep, vast field that really none of us can really understand. We can only give numbers, but we can't even begin to comprehend how deep it must have been. And of course, dinosaurs lived for a long time. For example, if we study this visualization, the reign of the dinosaurs starts around the mid-Triassic period, and look how long they lived. Compared to that, the entire mammal era, they say, is just 1/3 or even less. And then humanity's lifespan is even smaller. Tiny. And who knows what must have happened in these vast depths of time. And it's, for example, not all dinosaurs lived in the same time either. For example, the famous shingle-backed Stegosaurus lived around this time, around the Jurassic era. And everybody's favorite dinosaur, T-Rex, lived towards the end of the Cretaceous. And the time between two familiar types of dinosaur is actually more than the time between the last dinosaurs and humanity. So, kind of makes you think about it, doesn't it? And of course, how are dinosaurs made in a way? You always see these news in the side corner of the newspapers or the websites you visit. New dinosaur discovery, new dinosaur described, new description, blah blah blah, new discovery. But how does this really happen? This is another one of the blatantly obvious things that many lay people are damningly ignorant about. So let's outline that process for a bit. How are dinosaurs, in brackets, produced? So in behind all these news stories lays a complicated process. First, usually things start with a fossil dig, but if you're lucky, you can also stumble into remains, and a fossil dig just looks like this. It's a mess of stone and bones, and it takes months or even years to sort them out, combine them into some sort of relevant animal, and usually most of the bones are missing, so you have to conjecture for a lot of details. And then, if that wasn't enough, you have to publish it. Of course, before that, sometimes people really do get extremely lucky and find articulated dinosaur skeletons and articulated remains that may even include things like fat, skins, muscles, or even feathers, but these are extremely rare. Most dinosaur discoveries just look like this, and you just have to piece the jigsaw by yourself. And then there's a side note here, but there's a burgeoning industry of private dinosaur collection and private ownership of fossils. This is a very complicated issue, made all the more complicated with the vast sums of money involved in it. For example, some dinosaur specimens that can really shed light into how these animals lived and behaved, or even remains of hitherto undescribed forms. They are just laying in some rich dude's ranch house or collection, and scientists cannot access or study these specimens as easily as they could study specimens in a museum. Like Indiana Jones once said, it belongs in a museum, and it's my conviction that private collecting of fossils, while very lucrative and it could really inject some money into this penniless field, ultimately it does more damage than good, because also you get hoaxers and fake fossils involved, and they just muddle everything up. But here's a selection of privately owned fossils. A juvenile of the perplexing giant seagoing predatory dinosaur Spinosaurus, a type of horned dinosaur that hasn't really been described, and it probably belongs in a unique species, and a specimen showing two dinosaurs in combat. And we don't know about these scenes because they're privately owned. So there you go. But okay, imagine you dug your dinosaur out and you tried to and managed to cobble it together, and you avoided fossil hunters, or you avoided the temptation to sell them to a Silicon Valley boom entrepreneur. You avoided the temptation to have it turned into Jeff Bezos' cocaine table. And then begins this long process, almost as long as the dig, but sometimes even longer, of describing and scientifically publishing these remains. So you have to describe all these fossils you've dug up. You have to compare them with other similar discoveries. And if they're a new specimen, you can publish a paper about them. And scientific publication is also rife with its own problems. Many people are in this for a job. So there is this tendency to sometimes, but not always, overinflate certain discoveries, and certain figures in the field loom larger than life. And anecdotally, I know that in the field of dinosaur research, let's just say peer pressure, bullying, or mobbing is sometimes real. Not always, but sometimes. But anyways, at the end you get this scientific description with probably a reasonable approximation of how the animal might have looked, or certain elements of it. For example, these are all from the discovery of a predatory dinosaur called... what's it called? Murus raptor. This kind of big, clawed, predatory, like most people's stock image of a predatory dinosaur. It's also really unique in certain respects, but that's another story we won't get into right now. So after this description and after this skeletal schematic drawing, finally an artist can try to illustrate it. This is the illustration of the same dinosaur by the artist called Christopher Chavez. And then finally it gets published in a newspaper. So it's a long and arduous road, but it's also full of mistakes. Every year something gets reappraised, and sometimes people make ridiculous mistakes. But this is not to laugh at these people, but it is just to hint at how many false discoveries we might be taking as truth in today's state of the art of dinosaur science. For example, a couple of years ago, scientists discovered this strange sea reptile called Atopodentatus, which means atypical teeth. And it really had this ordinary looking body, really like heavy bones, a big tail. It was a swimming reptile, but its head was really something strange, because it seemed to have these cleft rabbit-like lips lined with teeth. It was completely unlike anything that has ever lived before or after. And people even call this a Lovecraftian marine reptile. This was not a proper dinosaur, but a sea-going reptile that lived at the time of dinosaurs. So Atopodentatus was really fascinating, But then another skull was found. Boink. You see, what people interpreted as two halves of a strange cleft rabbit-like tooth bone were actually the squashed and disarticulated remains of a wide duck-like bill type of mouth lined with tiny teeth. It still was a very strange animal. Here's its drawing by Joshua Knupp, also one of the best dinosaur artists alive today, in my opinion. But look at the first skull. It's distorted. The distortion usually happens because fossils get preserved as stones, and over millions of years, stone layers can get distorted or crushed. But now we know it looked like this. But suppose if this skeleton had never been discovered and we were only left with this one, we would be very happy, assuming the seas were probably populated by these cleft, hair-lipped Lovecraftian monstrosities. But we don't, thanks to this fossil. I mean, it's just sobering, really. And I'm certain that there are certain details that we think we know about dinosaurs that are just like this. They're based on a faulty fossil or a faulty interpretation of a fossil, and we just take it for granted. But we will never know. Wow. Tea time. So, another thing most people don't realize, that dinosaurs evolved and diversified like all other creatures, and like all other creatures, the best way to study this is by using something called cladistics. Now, cladistics is basically the science of how closely related certain creatures are to each other. For example, here's a very basic cladistic table of living and extinct animals, and you see sharks are more distantly related to anything else except for tuna fish, and then tuna and sharks are more distantly related to all land-living vertebrates. And if you take frogs out of the equation, then you get all non-amphibian vertebrates, and then here you go on and go forth. For example, crocodiles, Saurischian dinosaurs, birds, and ornithischian dinosaurs, we will get to what these mean in a minute, form one clade. A clade doesn't have to be defined really strictly. Its resolution can vary with the level at which you study it. So you could only have a clade that consists of humans and apes, for example. Or you could have a clade that consists only of mammals, and here it is. So basically this is what cladistics is all about. And dinosaurs were extremely diverse. You know, they were not just a collection of weird freaks. I mean, this is another extremely simplified cladistic view of dinosaur classification. So you see, there's a branch of the family tree for everything. For example, oops, sorry, I have to deal with a slipping contact lens. Okay, it's back in place. Okay, so the famous long-necked dinosaurs form one clade with slightly related herbivores, and these form another clade with birds and theropods. Theropods being meat-eating dinosaurs such as T-Rex and relatives. So, you know, it looks a bit complicated. But there was a science to classify these things. They were not just a jumble bag of freaky monsters. And in fact, the science of classifying dinosaurs is far more complex. Imagine we look at today's world. You got raccoons, you got foxes, you got wolves, and they form one clade. And then you got other things like monkeys, whales, and these are just the mammals, by the way. So dinosaurs were as diverse, and the way we study and classify them is always changing. But a lot of science goes to the classification of dinosaurs, their relations with each other and present-day birds. It's always being revised, but slowly over the decades a clear picture is emerging. And sometimes the classification of these animals is almost as interesting as fossil digs themselves. And a significant amount of dinosaur research today is based on the cladistic side of the things rather than the bones. I mean, there's this thing in which people program all the characteristics of the bones they have discovered, and these characteristics get fed into a program which draws these cladistic trees according to how many common points they have. This doesn't give us a common view of relationships directly, but it gives us family trees through which we can make certain inferences. But it's a really complicated and fun area of dinosaur studies if you know how to get into it. I mean, this is another, for example, all of us think there's like predatory dinosaurs, T-Rex, whatever. But big predatory dinosaurs had many subdivisions within themselves, and they were like, imagine carnivores today. You got cats, you got hyenas, you got lions, you got wolves, you got foxes, you got raccoons, you even got things like seals and sea lions, and they all make up one clade, carnivores. And just like those, the familiar types of dinosaurs, like the big-ass hunters or the long-necked herbivores, they all had tremendously diverse clades in and among themselves. And they were stunningly diverse. I mean, this wonderful artist, Gabriel Ugueto, Google his name, makes these family tree posters that really show the exact breadth of diversity that many dinosaur groups have. For example, on the left, we just see the groups of horned dinosaurs, similar to Triceratops and relatives, and there were just dozens, if not hundreds of kinds. And keep in mind, these are only the ones we could discover as fossils. So in reality, about like 1 out of 10 of everything gets fossilized if they're lucky. So there are entire branches of the dinosaur family tree that we probably will never get to know. But it's just sobering and thought-provoking, really. Just like every other animal today. For example, this is a cladistic view of just mammals. And you see monkeys are here, lemurs, whales, zebras. Genetics allow us to build a complete cladistic family tree of mammals. With dinosaur, we don't have genes, obviously, so we can only make inferences based on these machine-built family trees that we obtain from the study of fossils. So it's an iffy science, but it's extremely fascinating. But even in the smoky, hazy picture that emerges, you can see some patterns of evolution emerging. Okay, so that was a mouthful. And of course, these views are constantly being updated. That's another fact that normies need to know. Dinosaur science is not something set in stone. In fact, it's always being challenged within itself. For example, the latest, in 2017, there was a study that suggested the way we grouped dinosaurs previously was completely wrong, in a way. So the old view was that the herbivore dinosaurs that did not have long necks formed one major clade within the dinosaur family tree. And then on the other branch, we had the plant-eating long-necked dinosaurs called the sauropods, and then the meat-eating dinosaurs called the theropods, and relatives. And birds are also in this branch, by the way. Now, according to Matthew Barron, this is the old view. He suggested that actually the long-necked plant eaters called sauropods made out one distant branch of the dinosaur clade, and then the ornithischian herbivores and the theropods were actually closely related. He did this by studying the earliest known groups of all three main clades of dinosaurs. And for a while in 2017 and 18, it seemed like this was like the new state of the art, but not many researchers adopted this. Probably my personal opinion is that these clades have a really short joining base, so you could juggle it either way almost. The first ornithischians, the first theropods, and the first sauropods looked really alike. So it's almost a non-problem. But back in 2017, this was really shaking the foundations of the dinosaur world. Now it's still an interesting view, but still not turning it upside down. But back in the day, everybody was excited about this theory. So let's go to our latest pictures of how dinosaurs looked. We spent a lot of time trying to understand how time operates and how clades operate, and I hope this could teach something to you, first-time viewer or casual dinosaur interested enthusiasts. The study of these animals is extremely deep and complex. But now let's go and look at what we know about dinosaurs. For example, contrary to the common trope, not all dinosaurs were giant. You had a lot of chicken or turkey or dog or cat-sized dinosaurs, and these actually made up the majority of dinosaur diversity. For example, here is a little Sinosauropteryx and others. You see in this diagram by artist and researcher Matt Martinuke, you have a lot of tiny dinosaurs, and if they were alive today, you could probably keep them as pets or even poultry. I'm sure a lot of them would make good eating. Another small dinosaur, a bird-like form, an extremely bird-like form called Aurornis. Look at its skeleton. It looks like a lanky lizard dude, doesn't it? But it has residual traces of feathers around it, and this is the most common way it's reconstructed, kind of like a strange bird with a long tail. And look how small it was. I mean, its head was 4 centimeters. Tiny. It would make like a pigeon-sized, slightly larger. It would make a good cage pet if it was alive today. This is another famous dinosaur fossil called Mosasaurus, a herbivorous plant-eating dinosaur that's known from a juvenile fossil that was only as big as a puppy. Of course, this thing probably grew larger, but the fossil we have is tiny. But some dinosaurs really were big ass, so to speak. There are traces of dinosaurs which probably could grow as big as 30, 40 meters, even larger. And here's a reconstruction of how these would look if they were alive today. In this amazing art by John Conway, we see Barosaurus, the titanic plant-eating sauropod dinosaur, next to Diplodocus, which was also a giant dinosaur in itself. Diplodocus was as long as a tennis court. Barosaurus loomed even larger. And here are two people for scale. These animals really existed, and they must have been a force of nature. Out of all dinosaurs and relatives, these are the ones I want to see today. Like, if I was given a ticket to see only one kind of extinct animal, I would choose these big plant-eating dinosaurs, because we have nothing like them today. Simply surreal. And even though we have complete skeletons, we still aren't certain about how they lived. Some people suggest they were aquatic because nothing else in their view could support the weight of these bones. But I disagree. I think they were like very lightly built. They must have been doing something right, because they existed for tens and even hundreds of millions of years. Just drink it in. Fascinating. Here are the bones of certain the giant sauropod dinosaurs. Here we have a reconstructed vertebra that's just one spinal disc of this giant of the giants form known as Amphicoelias, next to a guy. And here's the foreleg of Supersaurus, another big form. And here we have the scapula, the shoulder blade of a similar giant sauropod dinosaur next to a person. These things are usually known from fragmentary remains, but even those that remain are enough to give us a clue about just how big, how stupendous these animals might have been. Like the pyramids, they're a mystery. And of course, another assumption was that dinosaurs just lived by themselves and everything else we saw were like flying dinosaurs or swimming dinosaurs. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Dinosaurs shared their world with a lot of other animals, including the famous flying reptiles known as pterosaurs. These are a selection of amazing artworks of pterosaurs from pteros.com. So please visit this website and support them if possible. These animals occupied flying niches that some birds occupy in the present day world, but there must have been a huge diversity of them, and they were just amazing. I could give you a 4-hour talk on pterosaurs alone, and maybe I will one day. Here are more pterosaurs. There were some giants among them that could swallow smaller dinosaurs whole. These were known as azdarshids, and they were like big storks with 4 legs. They were among the largest flying animals that this planet has ever seen. And here's another pterosaur by the inimitable John Conway. Also begin to look at these artworks as like works of art and see how different they are from the blood and guts or stupid action scenes you see in Hollywood films or computer games. Like living animals today, the artwork of dinosaurs can be as sublime and as calm and serene and peaceful without losing anything from its scariness or otherworldliness. But if you took a camera and went back in time, chances are you would see more sights like these artworks and less like Jurassic Park. Here's another pterosaur called Tropiognathus, drifting in the wind like a pelican with sails and teeth. Just extraordinary. Just drink these artworks in, people, because this is what has fascinated me with dinosaurs. After growing up from my Jurassic Park childhood, this was what hooked me in to deeper study of these animals. Here's another pterosaur called Cericipterus. This had a big head, sharp teeth, and scientists probably think it used these to hunt other flying reptiles. Another form called Tupandactylus with an extraordinary flamboyant crest. We actually have skulls of animals that look like this, and how it might have looked in real life is anybody's guess, but they were quite unlike anything else the world has ever seen afterwards. And only great artists like John Conway can do justice to their reconstructions, I believe. Of course, you also had mammals living along dinosaurs, and the common trope goes dinosaurs ruled the world. Mammals were always mouse-sized and terrified of dinosaurs, but that's not the case. Towards the end of the age of dinosaurs, you had really big mammals that were giving some dinosaurs quite a hard time. This, for example, is a 1.5 meter long stoat-like animal called Repenomamus, a dog-sized mammal that hunted small dinosaurs, and it coexisted with dinosaurs in the latest years of their reign. You had a diversity of mammals. You had an otter-like form known as Castora cauda. It had a beaver-like tail, but it wasn't related to otters or beavers or anything. And there were even gliding mammals in dinosaur times. This one on the right is called Volaticotherium. And they had similar shapes to small mammals living today. But evolutionarily speaking, they descended from, remember our lesson with cladistics, they descended from earlier clades of mammals. And they weren't directly related to otters or beavers or flying squirrels today. They were doing their own thing. But this is to show you that dinosaur days were really diverse. You had sharks, just like you do today. You got a whole selection of marine reptiles, part of which included giant lizards, and I mean proper lizards, like monitor lizards with fins and flippers that grew as long as a bus. And it was just a extraordinarily diverse time in the world's history. Here are some of the other prehistoric marine reptiles. The famous long-necked elasmosaur, Thalassomeodon. And just look at it. Probably these guys lived by engulfing fish, by suddenly expanding their throats, but no one really knows. Just look at it. I mean, this is not a dinosaur, by the way. It comes from a completely unrelated group of swimming reptiles. And here is my take. The famous ichthyosaur, fish reptile known as Urinosaurus, with a swordfish-like long nose. I'm a dinosaur artist too, by the way. Check out my artworks at cmkozeman.com. And while you're there, also consider donating me through patreon.com. You know, I really need your donations, but for this talk, I'll keep the Patreon begging short because I'm showcasing the works of many amazing artists who are much more talented than myself. But for this time round, support them instead of supporting me. Crocodiles were also there. There were giant crocodiles accompanying dinosaurs in a variety of environments. In fact, there were couple of distinct giant crocodiles that shared the world of dinosaurs. This one is the skull of a big, very strange crocodile called Sarcosuchus. Notice this crater-like growth on its nose, and it was probably home to a kind of bulbous, fleshy, sound-producing organ or something like that. And there were also like strange crocodiles too. Like some groups of crocodiles in South America evolved to be really similar in a weird way to mammals. They had erect limbs, so they were not sprawling, and they had short faces. They looked almost like dogs. And there were even like armadillo type crocodiles, whatever. A lot of evolutionary experiments were being played out. But let's go back to dinosaurs. I could give you 4-hour talks on dinosaurs, crocodiles, pterosaurs, and all the rest. But we have to focus on dinosaurs now. You know, everyone thinks the predatory dinosaurs were just meat eaters and monsters, but that's not the case. A number of clades emerging from predatory dinosaur groups actually evolved to be herbivorous. These are one example. Ornithomimus and babies. Ornithomimus was probably an omnivore. It ate everything, including plants. But remember the cladistics that we've been talking about. So in one case here, you have a reversion to herbivory. You got another case here with the ornithomimids, and some of them just evolved bizarre forms. So remember this one. Things like Ornithomimus really exaggerated their features. The head grew longer. It adopted a sort of duck-like bill, and the end of this evolutionary experiment was this. Dinosaurs, a relative of the ornithomimus that was adapted for almost pure herbivory. It had very sharp claws and long arms to defend itself, and it had a sail-like back, which probably had muscles that supported its long neck and big head. We just don't know. It was a extraordinary creature, and this picture of this animal just emerged properly in the late 2010s. Before that, we only knew of the arms, and most people thought it was like this savage killer dinosaur with deadly arms, but it just turned out to be a giant humpbacked duck creature. I'm sure we got a few more surprises like this in store waiting for us. Another group of meat-eating dinosaurs also began to reduce their teeth and expand their claws and reduce the size of their heads. This one, called Falcarius, was an early therizinosaur, a scythe lizard. Scythe as in the farming implement. And you see why this name was adopted, because things like Falcarius evolved like stockier, almost goose-like bodies. They grew in size, and their fingernails grew in length. So they became these strange, like sloth or bear-like bird things that fed mostly on plants, but eventually diversified to form their own unique plant-eating clade. And the culmination of this clade was Therizinosaurus, this famous scythe dinosaur. Just look at its claws. One claw was almost 70 centimeters in length. It probably was even longer because claws have keratin covering them. So with one swipe, it could disembowel you. But it really didn't want to. It was a plant eater. John Conway portrayed Therizinosaurus like this, a shambling, sloth-like dinosaur that kind of shuffled about in the undergrowth and spent a lot of its time just eating. The plants would be digested in its big pot belly. It probably farted a lot. Smelly, stinky animal. But if you got too close, whoosh, the fingernails would eviscerate you. And of course, it needed weapons like this with all these dangerous predatory dinosaurs running about. Another dinosaur fact that more people begin to know these days is the fact that dinosaurs evolved into birds. The lightweight meat-eating dinosaurs eventually grew wings and longer arms and became birds, in a way. This is a very simplified evolutionary sequence by the artist David Bonadonna, but it was a complicated affair. You had many strange side streets or evolutionary pathways that really didn't go anywhere. For example, you had a whole group of alternative birds known as enantiornithines, and these looked like birds, but they weren't related to any bird alive today. They had toothy beaks, and their tails were like short like a modern bird's, but also in some ways less developed because they had multiple bones in them. The tail of a modern bird only has a single or a few bones. And there were these like weird clawed wings and clawed hind feet. It was like this bizarre monkey parrot lizard type of thing. And there are many types of enantiornithines. I'm not even gonna go there to the amazing extent of their diversity. Then you got these other things, called epidexipterygids. Basically, these were like bird-like dinosaurs that had bat-like wings and left no descendants. We knew their fossils for a long time, and like you see on the left, Everybody thought they were like aya dinosaurs, or they had these like very long arms that they used to probe under bark or hunt for insects. But then a relative turned out with a skin membrane preserved between these long arms and fingers. And lo and behold, we had this kind of dragon-like strange flying group of dinosaurs that left no descendants. So these are all to illustrate that the pathway from dinosaur to bird was a branching pathway, you know. Remember our cladistics lessons? There are a lot of clades in this messy transition. For example, there were also birds without wings, but with teeth. Hesperornithids. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. They were as long as a surfboard. They had long beaks with teeth, almost no forelegs, and they just swam about. Strange birds. And like many other examples we saw, they left no descendants. They were doing their own thing. Always consider the potential for life to do its own thing before an extinction comes and resets everything. There were even like groups of like proper dinosaurs that were also so bird-like that it's almost becomes a game of semantics to separate them from birds proper. Groups of dinosaurs known as oviraptorids or caudipterids were like experimenting with really bird-like body plans without evolving wings or flight. But if they were alive today, they would just look like big ostrich-like things. Some of them were quite large. I mean, look at this one. Sittipati was 2.5 meters long and had these big claws in its wings. So they were not the birds you would want to mess with. But then some relatives were like really tiny with puny wings and still claws in them, but strange world, strange time, strange birds. There are also these guys who are also very bird-like, but instead of wings, they have these single-digited claws with an extremely strong bone powering them. Most people thought, they still think that these may have lived like anteaters. Maybe they use these like single claws to dig or grab things. Nobody really knows. Some people call them anteater dinosaurs without good reason. They think maybe they use these arms to crack open termite mounds, but they could have been doing anything. Maybe it was a defensive tool. Maybe they acted like two pincers. No one knows. You also had these guys, the four-winged flying raptor dinosaurs called Microraptor. So in evolutionary terms, these guys were really close to Velociraptor, Deinonychus, and the famous raptors in Jurassic World. But they were really small, and to make things more interesting, they had 4 wings, so to speak. Their legs had long wing feathers that probably hung out like strange pants, I don't know. And they were almost certainly capable of powered flight. So get a load of that. The famous raptor dinosaurs could have been descendants of flying ancestors, but no one knows for sure. Maybe this was a side group or an ancestor group. When you think in clades, everything becomes possible, but also everything falls into place. Here's the skeleton of Microraptor. The head really looks like a proper dinosaur, and the tail is really long. The legs are splaying outwards with wing feathers. Just bizarre. And of course, with all these bird-dinosaur relations, it's like any serious person today knows that most dinosaurs were covered in feathers. Here's an early form, Sinosauropteryx, and it doesn't seem to have wings, but there's like a layer of primitive feather-like growth covering all of its back and tail. And these animals were probably very like smooth, hairy or downy looking in real life. And we know specimens like these from the earliest groups of dinosaurs. So sometimes the later groups could have lost the feathers, but the baseline of dinosaurs seem to be covered in feathers. There's this debates like some people online, without a shred of knowledge, by the way, say that dinosaurs, they're turning our dinosaurs into birds. They just look cooler as reptiles. But guess what? Natural history doesn't give two flying figs about being cool. And it just is, man. You just have to take it. I mean, here's more specimens with feathers. Again, Microraptor with multiple wing and leg feathers. Here is a large Therizinosaur, so a plant-eating descendant of meat-eating dinosaurs, and it's covered with these spiky, thick-set growths that may not have been like feathers, but they were probably like spiny, And then another unnamed relative of Velociraptor, again with fuzz and fur around its head. Even more like, especially from China, you just have so many fossils of feathered dinosaurs coming that just even stop being interesting. Here's two specimens, Zhen Yuanlong and Eosinopteryx. And even like relatives of T-Rex, called Eutyrannus, were found with a faint covering of fur or feather-like growths around their tails. This is a huge dinosaur. It's actually the largest dinosaur from which we know proper indisputable evidence of hair-like integument. But there, the picture is as it stands. And it makes sense. I mean, if an animal is warm-blooded and has an active life, heck, even insects have fur. It just doesn't make sense for a large animal to be naked running about. Unless maybe in the case of the very big herbivorous dinosaurs that may have secondarily lost their ancestral feathery covering, much like elephants and rhinos and hippos living today. And if any doubts remain, we even have like an actual fossil of a dinosaur tail with feathers trapped in amber. So, you have to be running through a lot of mental gymnastics if you want to deny the enfeathering of dinosaurs in this day and age. It's 2020, man! Grow up! Even the herbivorous dinosaurs had furry or feathery ancestors. Tian Yulong, for example, an early plant-eating dinosaur whose lineage later gave rise to all the horned and shingle-backed and iguanodont plant-eaters. This guy had feathers. So maybe its descendants, through being big, lost these feather or fur-like integuments, but the ancestral form was pretty obvious. Here you go. And here's the fossil, and here's a abundance of feather-like filaments near its tail. We even have like different stages of feather evolution documented in fossils. First you have things like long spikes or scales, then these start multiplying, then they start branching out and then interlocking and even evolving into proper asymmetrical flying feathers in birds and some dinosaurs. And then another trope is that of the skinny, shrink-wrapped dinosaur, as if it's shrink-wrapped in a kind of packaging of plastic film or something. Throughout a long period in the history of dinosaur art, artists had this thing of portraying every nuance of the skeleton under the fossil. And in trying to do that, they actually accidentally shrink wrapped the dinosaurs. So a lot of reconstructions from the 90s or the 80s look like they're dying of cancer or something. This is a otherwise sublime dinosaur artist known as Eli Kish, but her dinosaurs are always notoriously shrink wrapped. The Tyrannosaurus here even has the pubic bone visible, which no other living animal must. And they almost look like these Renaissance paintings showing the personification of death or plague, you know. You got this scrawny-ass Grim Reaper dude. All the teeth are visible, all the holes in the skull are visible. No animal looked like that, you know, with or without feathers. But here's a proper, fat, chunky rendition of Tyrannosaurus. One that could really give you a sense of wholesomeness by the amazing artist Matt Martinuke. And we even have like mummified fossils of certain dinosaurs that preserve a lot of muscle and fat around their skeletons. In fact, the big plant-eating dinosaurs seem to be extremely well muscled. You know, like we're not even doing them enough justice. We need to make our dinosaurs tick, 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 tick. We need to show more booty, more muscles, more chunk and chonk, because that's how nature rolls. I mean, if you look at x-rays of any living animal, mammal, bird, or whatever, there's a lot of meat, muscles, skin covering the leg bones. This is a parrot, by the way. And on top of that, the parrot has feathers, so it's even more rounded and wholesome looking. Similar story with the horse, for example. Look how muscled its neck is. Just amazing. Maybe dinosaurs didn't have mammal type thick muscles on their necks, but just look at this skeleton of a hadrosaur, a plant-eating duck-billed dinosaur, and it's just amazingly well muscled. And this neck, you see the bones here, was probably lost in a thick horse-like neck. Well, you could say, well, these are all mammals and birds. How about reptiles? Maybe dinosaurs were similar to reptiles. Or even alligators. Alligators are... Oh my god, you're wrong again. Because reptiles are almost as chunky. This is the skeleton of an alligator. Look how much fat there is in the body, in the belly. Look how thick the tail is at the junction at which it joins the body. The head is, quite scully looking. But this is a bearded dragon. Look how thick and flabby its arms and legs are. Now, if you go back to this Eli Kish painting, look how thin and scrawny looking the leg is. It's almost as if the artist was scared of making it look chunky, because maybe she was worried it would lose something from its dinosaurness, so to speak. And with the flesh and with the integument comes the possibility of these unimaginable structures, which we have examples of today. For example, a lot of dinosaurs had pneumatic bones. That is to say, their bones had empty spaces for air sacs. Now, these air sacs could have sported inflatable display organs or wattles or folds of skin of any sort. This is John Conway's rendition of Allosaurus with this kind of inflatable head sac. And this is this amazing artist. His name is Emiliano Trocco. And this is his view of Apatosaurus, the plant-eating dinosaur that has these like elephant-like folds of skin around its big bulky neck. You know, it looks quite weird, but it also looks really intuitive, you know. Maybe something like this makes more sense than a naked-ass scrawny neck. It's just full of unknown unknowns. So when studying fossils, there are known unknowns. You know that the color of a dinosaur is unknown. But then there could be unknown unknowns. To borrow a phrase from Dick Cheney, there could be structures that just leave no fossil evidences. Think about it, the colors of a peacock's tail or the stripes of a tiger, they're just fascinating, and they're characters that define that animal. But no fossil would remain out of the characters that I just described. A peacock's tail wouldn't fossilize. A tiger's stripes wouldn't fossilize. So I'm sure all dinosaurs and all extinct animals had these unknown unknowns. And it's up to sublime and great dinosaur artists like John Conway, seen here, to imagine what they may have looked like. And in this type of imagination, you could actually let yourself run wild a bit, but within the realms of plausibility. For example, this is a raptor dinosaur known as Buitreraptor, and it had a long head, and we probably know from its relatives that it was quite bird-like. But if it's bird-like, there's no reason not to imagine that its neck could have these amazing display feathers. We just wouldn't know, but it probably was there. Not this color or this feather in particular, but something like it, and something we can never imagine, lost forever in the mists of time. In fact, if we made the same mistakes contemporary paleoartists make in reconstructing dinosaurs, we would get quite weird views of present-day animals. And we actually did this experiment. For example, can you guess what this is? It's a horse reconstructed with the same mistakes we see in palaeo-art. Imagine like this painting, the same mistakes applied to the skeleton of a horse. Look at its hind legs. It would give us something like this, scrawny. Like if a future paleontologist studied all the animals living today, maybe they wouldn't even realize that hooves worked the way they do, so they would kind of bend the bones and try to make it more realistic in their own view. If they didn't know about feathers, they would probably imagine present-day birds as these freakish, skinny, bizarre animals that walked around, and the wings maybe they would interpret as sight-like organs they used to catch fish, maybe, who knows. And a cat, the cutest animal alive today, would be reconstructed like this, a murderous killing machine who's only out there to shed blood. And this is the same mistake Jurassic Park is making with the raptor dinosaurs. It's just no different. And of course, throughout the years and decades, we had changing looks at dinosaurs. I mean, our current vision of bird-like dinosaurs is only the last in a long line of mental paradigm shifts. At the beginning, dinosaurs were reconstructed as big, brutish beasts. There was no special drive to make them reptilian. People didn't quite know what they were dealing with. But the earliest reconstructions of dinosaurs looked like these guys. This is the reconstruction of Megalosaurus, the earliest named dinosaur, by Richard Owen. And this artwork is from 1854. And in fact, the Victorians made their own dinosaur park in Crystal Palace at London with really lifelike and wonderful sculptures of these huge, shambling, lizard-like behemoths. For its time, this was the state of art in dinosaur science and dinosaur reconstruction. Everything these people knew about dinosaurs pointed to creatures that looked like this. And of course, science evolved, discoveries were made, and our look evolved. And then you come to the second era of dinosaur reconstruction between, let's say, the 1930s and the late 1970s, of the cold-blooded dinosaur trope, let's say. In this era, dinosaurs were known with the similar shapes that we know today, but they were all like skinned as cold-blooded, lumbering, and ultimately doomed reptiles for some reason. There were some great artists in that time. Zdeněk Burian, seen on the right with his reconstruction of Iguanodon, and on the left side with Charles Knight's amazing lifelike mural of Apatosaurus. I mean, also look at how a lot of the effort goes into rendering the background reliably. And in some cases, the dinosaurs are just like an afterthought. But if you get the world right, you can make people feel things about this world, and you can immerse themselves. You can immerse your audience in this reality. Another beautiful painting by Charles Knight, dated, but it doesn't make it any less a work of art. And then slowly this evolved into a game of telephone or a game of Chinese whispers, as less and less talented artists began to copy from each other's works, and you came to the undeniably crap artworks depicting these not even reptilian, like these caricatures that we saw on many childhood books. And if you were born in the 1970s or the 80s or even the 90s, you grew up with reconstructions like this. It was a big game of telephone, and everybody was repeating each other's mistakes. Look at this page from an unnamed children's book. Look at the background. Look at the Iguanodon. Here is Zdeněk Burian's Iguanodon and the trees. They changed them a little so it didn't look like cheating, but we know what they did. Artists were usually forced to produce these artworks without really obtaining a familiarity with the animal's anatomy or their lifestyles, or even reading the science about them. You know, they just had to churn out these books. So correspondingly, the artwork was also bad. Then you came to a breath of fresh air, starting from 1969, but gaining traction a bit later on, of what we call the dinosaur renaissance. Now, in this era, the sluggish reptile stereotype was slowly discarded in favor of more warm-blooded, active, dynamic, and ultimately bird-like dinosaurs. But artists were still scared of like properly feathering or properly adorning their reconstructions with body fat or integument. In the dinosaur renaissance, the point was to make them look more sleek, fast, and dynamic. And this really got a intense phase during the 1990s. Here are images of galloping horned dinosaurs. If you look at the previous era, these were like stately, heavyweight, bulky animals. But all of a sudden, they're galloping like buffalo. And there are some really amazing artists of the dinosaur renaissance, like Gregory S. Paul. Myself included, every artist of this era was influenced by Greg Paul, and his work is just amazing. And he was one of the first artists to properly measure the bones. It's funny, isn't it? But he was one of the first to do this. He was one of the first artists to properly measure and reconstruct the skeletons before attempting a painting, and his attention to detail shows. Even though these reconstructions would now feel too shrink-wrapped for us, he really left his mark in the history of dinosaur art. More artwork by Gregory Paul. He was really brave, and he was one of the first artists to dress up raptor dinosaurs with proper feathers before such fossils were found, I might add. So he was even prescient in that respect. And this is actually the age that gave us the images of the dinosaurs seen in Jurassic Park. In the mid-1990s, the dinosaurs shown in Jurassic Park were state-of-the-art. They were best, and they were everything that we knew about these creatures. And it's really a pity that film producers that came afterwards really let this trope stick, and they did not adopt the later discoveries, and their dinosaurs are perpetually locked in the 1990s in a form of growing caricature in what we in the trade like to call awesome bro art. So there's a diseased subsection of 1990s dinosaur renaissance art, again produced mostly by inept artists, but they take this like, oh, so fast and so vicious, so sleek and so dynamic, they take it to a ridiculous extreme, and their depictions look more like things from a computer game. And it's no wonder why these tropes are so popular in computer games. These like sleek, lean, alien-like dinosaurs whose only business is killing. And we call this awesome bro art. And it's really like the biggest insult you could render to an extinct group of animals. Because in fact, dangerous animals in real life have much more going about them. You know, they're consider the best examples of wildlife art today. Here's an old lithograph of a resting tiger in India. The potential for violence is implied, and attention is instead given to the background, the animal's pose, and its character. And really, look at this, for example, a wolf at night by Frederick Remington, the great Western artist. Like, this gives us a chill to our bones without looking anything like this. You know, it doesn't need machine guns or hot babes, or it doesn't need every bone and sinew to show. It's just a sleek, dark animal in the dead of night looking at you. Also consider the amazing art by bird artists. They're like head and shoulders above the crowd in terms of imbibing their creations with feeling, character, and atmosphere. John James Audubon, of course, needs no introduction. He really is the master of bird art, and there's really no reason why we shouldn't render dinosaurs like this. There's a new paradigm of looking at extinct life today. Landscapes, for example, are as important as the animals in them. We have rigorous reconstructions now based on skeletal restorations, but we don't really need any forced awesomeness to let this reconstruction shine. Also, we can look at all the bones, but we must also feel confident to bury them under fur and feather after figuring out how the skeletons work, because that's just how real life animals works. And if there are any blanks, and believe me, there are a lot of gaps in the fossil record, we could use plausible speculation to fill them in. And instead of copying real life animals, for example, instead of taking a skeleton and giving it feathers like a emu or colors like a cassowary, we must force ourselves to invent unique but plausible reconstructions like these. Now I'm going to be showcasing some of the amazing artwork by the true geniuses in this genre. Artwork by Douglas Henderson, one of the masters of this whole thing. And here he's showing these horned dinosaurs interacting with pterosaurs, interacting with their environment. With Douglas Henderson, the background and the plants are almost as important, if not more important, than the animals he draws. They're just like time machines. You feel like you are there. And a lot of that make-believe, that suspension of disbelief, is accomplished through a restoration of the flora, the environments. And you see, here, for example, is one of those giant crocodiles that lived at the time of dinosaurs. But Henderson doesn't make it scream or kill other animals. It's just a huge dark shape. And what gives it its sense of strength is the environment surrounding it and the animals surrounding it. More artwork by Douglas Henderson. Just makes you feel like you're there. John Conway, the inimitable modern master of palaeo-art, really makes his dinosaurs stand out and unique. And he doesn't shy away from their bird relations. So even tyrannosaurs are feathered in a way. But he really shines out the most in his restoration of flying reptiles. Look at these, I mean. Flying in a starry night. Or just herbivores being themselves and vibing and chilling in the forest. Animals interacting with each other, showing love, tenderness, affection. These feelings are as common as predatory actions in nature. I mean, nature isn't Winnie the Pooh land, but it's not so, the Saw horror movie series either. And in conclusion, what can dinosaurs teach us? Throughout this talk, I tried to show you how important it was to portray dinosaurs accurately. But, this is just an erudite game. Doing accurate dinosaurs doesn't really give us anything. But the skills and understanding of life, the understanding of nature, time, evolution, cladistics, it really contributes to a person. It contributes to our understanding of nature. And if you're deep about it, understanding evolution and cladistics also kind of gives you a philosophical way to organize things and look at the world. It's a new way of looking at nature. It's a new way of looking about time. And ultimately, it's a new way to think about ourselves, humanity, and our legacy on this planet. Well, thank you all. I've been meaning to make this video for a long time, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please consider supporting me on patreon.com. And if you want to get all yesterday's, you could find it on amazon.com, on other platforms. And all your yesterdays, you could download it right now from the link in the video description below. Have a nice day, everyone. This has been C.M. Kozeman. Na 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 na.